Hey, so in this video, I thought it might be helpful to go over the base code for A-frame and also how HTML works, which is basically the syntax of the language and how everything is laid out and what important keywords there are. So I thought it might be good to start this video off with just the base code of A-frame. So when you start up a new project, this is what it's going to look like, or at least this is what you want to start with in your HTML file. So basically what all these are is these are HTML elements. So the HTML and the HTML here at the bottom. And of course, we'll go into this in further detail, the format and layout of these elements. But the one important thing to notice here is at the top, we have a script element. So before in one of my earlier videos, I may have mentioned that A-frame is an extension of HTML. And this is essentially that idea right here in the code. So up here in the head is where you add extra stuff to HTML, and we're adding the A-frame script to here so that we can have the functionality. And an example of that is the ascene elements down here are provided from this script that we put up in the top. All right, so now we're going to talk about the HTML elements and attributes. So this is a simple HTML element, and it's just a box. And I thought for the purposes of this video, because we're doing A-frame, I thought to use the A box element, which is provided from A-frame. So this is just a simple A box, and you'll notice that it just has A box on the left and the right side. So you have your opening tag and then your closing tag. The only difference is you have this extra character here, or the slash, and they both have to have the same name. So if you're starting with A box, you want to end with A box. And I say that this has no attributes because we never defined a position, a rotation, a color, or anything like that for the box. It's just plain. And essentially what happens is these HTML elements have default values. So if you don't put a position, a color, or anything, it's just going to assume the default values for those. All right, so here's an example where we do have an attribute defined in our A box. And one of those attributes is position. So you'll notice here that the HTML attribute has a name, which is the position in the color orange. And then in the quotation marks in green, we have our actual value. So you're probably wondering why we have 3 numbers spaced out in the quotation marks. The actual value that you have to provide the attribute depends on what kind of attribute it is. So if it's a position, you have to give it an X, a Y, and a Z value. And that's essentially what we have here. So our -1 is our X, our 0 is the Y, and then our 2.5 is the Z. And you might get something like you want to define like a color, which is another attribute to, for the A-frame entity. And the color has a hex value actually in the quotation marks instead of numbers like these. So that's an A box with 1 value. And now here's an A box with multiple elements, or sorry, multiple attributes. So we're still looking at 1 element, which is this whole A box. And then the A box has a bunch of attributes with it. So we still have the same position element, attribute that we defined. And again, when we define these attributes, they are overriding the default values. So the default value for position is 0, 0, 0. So when I do position equals -1, 0, 2.5, it overwrites it with that value. And you'll notice that here we have the color, which is in a hex value, which is basically a hashtag followed by any number 0 through 9, and then any letter A through F. And then you have a scale. And basically what the scale does is it takes its current sizing and it scales it up or it scales it down. So basically scale, again, for the box is X, Y, Z. So we're scaling it across the X, the Y, and the Z axis by 2 times. So we're just scaling it up twice. And yeah, so that's an example of a HTML element with multiple attributes. Now, so there's another concept in HTML coding called like a parent-child relationship. So you can actually put HTML elements within other HTML elements. And a good example of this given A-frame is if you want to move one object, but also have other objects move with it, then you, like, let's say you have a cube and you want a bunch of spheres to rotate with it like this, like an orbit. If you want to do that, you can have the A box as the parent. So again, there's the opening tag here and the closing tag here. And then you can add the sphere as the child element. So here's the opening tag and the closing tag again. And then what you can do in the A box is add an animation. Just like our other attributes like position and rotation, you can add an animation attribute and you can tell it to rotate. And then since this sphere is a child, it'll rotate around and with that box. And of course, there's no limit to how many children or parent objects you can have. You can keep adding more and more and more. And basically the child is added in between these two angle brackets here, just like we did here with the A box. All right, so now that we went over the basic formatting of the elements in HTML and A-frame, we're going to go over some important ones. And again, this is the same code that we started with. This is the base code. And there is the HTML element, which all HTML documents have. It's just where you put all of your other HTML elements. And yeah, that's basically it. Everything else is just a child of the HTML element. Now we have the head element. So this is an interesting one because this is where we put something called metadata into. And basically what that is just data about data. So if you want like a title for your web page that isn't necessarily shown on your web page, you can do that there. But essentially for us, what we're doing is we're adding our scripts into the head element as a child element. So a basically good example here is the script element is a child element of the head element. So the head element is a parent of that script element. And again, this is where we get our extension of A-frame from. All right, so now we have the body element, and this is the element of our HTML document where stuff is actually shown on the web page. This is what we want people to see on our web page. And then again, another child object of that is a scene. So that is provided from A-frame, that script up here in the head element or the script element. And this A scene is going to be the parent element of all of our A-frame object elements. And I think in this next slide, yes. So I provided a few examples here. So I added a box, a sphere, and a cylinder. And so these are all examples of A-frame A entity elements. So essentially all A-frame objects are, or they're primitive objects like a box, a sphere, a cylinder, are simpler versions of A entity. And if you want to create your own object, you can actually do an A entity element and define it. And that's something we can go over later if you want to. But for right now, we're just going to add simpler versions of A entity elements or primitive objects of A-frame, which are the box, the sphere, and the cylinder. And you'll notice that I put all of those within the A scene element as child elements. So you have your A box with your position, your color, and your scale. And then you'll notice too that the ordering of these attributes in the elements, the position, radius, color, they can be in any order you want. It doesn't matter. You can put them in at any order you want. You can define the attributes if you want to, or if you want to use the default values, you don't have to define or add in the attributes. So if I'm okay with using the default value for height, which I think is 1 maybe, I'm not sure, then you don't have to put the height attribute in here. If you want the default value, you can just leave it. And if you're wondering what those default values are, you can go onto aframe.io, their website, and then into their documents. And it should define to you what the default attributes are. And I think that's about it. So that's the A-frame syntax, the A-frame code syntax and formatting. If you have any questions or concerns about this, just let me know. But thanks for watching.